Hi everyone, this is Anna-Karin Evaldsson from Layers of Ink, and I'm happy to be here today at Splitcoaststampers with a tutorial for a debossed background with a lot of texture. So this is a resist technique using embossing folders together with white embossing powder and distress inks to make a background which will be different each time. You can also very easily vary your designs by using different embossing folders or different ink colors, for instance. So if you're making Christmas cards, this is perfect because you make a lot of cards quickly, but they will all look different from each other. So you will need embossing folders and watercolor paper. You can also try other types of papers to see how they will work. You will also need embossing ink and white or clear embossing powder. We're going to ink on the side of the embossing folder which debosses the design into the paper, so it's the side where the design stands out, if that makes sense. So you'll just take the embossing ink and carefully rub it over the surface or dab it. Don't press too hard, but don't worry if it's not perfect. That will just give you more texture. And then put the watercolor paper on the other side of the folder and close it. I embossed my design off camera and here you have it. So this is then the embossed side, which we usually use. But today we're using the debossed side where the design is sort of imprinted into the paper. Just toss some white or clear embossing powder over the whole paper and then carefully tap it off. You don't need to tap too hard. It doesn't matter if there is powder stuck here and there. Melt the powder with a heat tool, being careful not to burn yourself. So next we'll repeat, but this time I used a snowflake embossing folder instead. It's fun to try this technique with a lot of different folders, and depending on the design you'll get a different result every time. Then, as before, put the paper on the opposite side of the folder and carefully close it. Emboss it and take the paper out. And here is our debossed design. And then toss over the embossing powder. You can also try this technique with different colors embossing powder for a different effect. And here are our two designs. And now we're going to start with a fun inking process. So pick a bunch of inks. You can try different color combinations. You don't need to use these that I used. And on a non-stick craft sheet, just smear the inks on the craft sheet. I started with the lighter colors and then added just a little bit of two darker shades. That was Mermaid Lagoon and that was Ground Espresso. And then mist with water. And finally press the paper into the ink. You need to smooch it around a bit here because we want to get ink into all those little details. And there you can see that the embossed area resists the ink. So next I just repeated the process on with the other card using almost the same colors, but I exchanged the Mermaid Lagoon to Uncharted Mariner instead. This is a fun way to try out different color combinations of distress inks. And then a little bit of brown. And then mist with water, again in the same way. And press the paper into the ink. I always enjoy seeing the result when I take that paper off the non-stick craft mat. Dry the papers, and then if you want darker colors, just repeat that process again with the inks, adding a bit more of the darker inks. If you prefer the light version, then you don't need to add more ink. I'm speeding up the video a little bit here, since it's basically the same thing. And again, just mist with water. You don't need to even press it down everywhere, unless you want to. I thought my card was too light, so I added more ink everywhere. And that will also make the design stand out more clearly. You can dab off some of the excess ink. And then I just did the same with the other snowflake design. And now we're going to add even more texture by using a little bit of distressed oxide ink. I want to be able to pick the color that I want to use in different areas of the card, so I'm placing the inks a bit further apart from each other. I also added some ground espresso distress ink, just for that darker texture. And mist with water. And now you're not going to press hard, you're just going to lightly touch the paper to the ink. It's important that the paper is dry when you do this step. It will give you more texture, instead of, if it's wet, the inks are just going to blend together with the background inks. Since the distressed oxide inks are opaque compared to the distressed inks, which are transparent, this last step adds little dots of colors on top of all that nice distress ink underneath. And now I just did the same on the other card. The antique linen looks nice also on the darker areas of the card. And if you want to add even more ink, you can just dry the card and do this one more time. One of my favorite parts with this technique is that you'll get a different result every time. And don't worry if it's not perfect, if you have stray embossing powder, or if there are areas where there's no embossing powder. It will all add to the texture and the final effect. To finish the card, I stamped labels and sentiment using Simon Says Stamp mixed labels and Let It Snow. I stamped a lot of labels with various blue inks, so I could make many cards. Here are the sentiments were stamped with brown ink to give it a softer look than using black ink, and I die cut the labels with the coordinating mixed labels dies, but you could also cut them with scissors. I also used glitter papers, a vellum, glimmer paper, craft paper and silver metallic papers, and they were used to cut foliage and berries with Simon Says Stamp budding branches and berry stems. I just made a whole bunch, and then I tucked them in on the cards under the labels. I finished 3 cards so far, but I can make a whole lot more since I made many backgrounds. The silver and glitter papers add to the winter feel of the cards. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it inspired you to do some resist debossed backgrounds. And thank you so much for watching. Happy crafting! Bye!